Hi everyone, and welcome to the finalist voting for the Maven Sales Challenge. Today we'll be discussing the 5 finalists for the main prize, and we'll be judging their projects by using the challenge objective to create an interactive dashboard to help sales managers at Maven Tech track their team's quarterly performance. Now we'll consider each finalist project as a whole, including the visuals, description, images, and embedded reports. So let's get started.
Okay, so I'm reviewing Kerryn Gresswell's sales challenge submission, and I have to say, I think this is a very strong submission. I'll dive into the dashboard shortly, but really quick, let's take a look at her write-up. And her write-up's important because when you look at her dashboard, it's very clear that Kerryn had the stakeholders in mind, and in this case, the stakeholders are sales managers. And she addresses the fact that because this is a challenge, we don't actually have real stakeholders to talk to. But I think that the questions that she asks from their perspective are spot on. And so she writes, the main goal for sales managers is viewing the current state of play for their team and obtaining actionable information. The key questions they want to answer are, how is my team tracking against our key KPIs? Are there team members who require extra support? Where should I focus my efforts? And is my team performing above average compared to the rest of the business? And so I think those are really strong questions that inform the design of her dashboard and yield really nice insights for sales managers. The other thing that she mentions in her write-up is that she's designing this with people who are not sophisticated Power BI users, which is very common when you're talking about non-technical teams. And I think that really shines through in the intuitiveness and design of her dashboard. So let's go ahead and take a look. And so starting at the top, I need to get back to page 1 here. But the first thing, and it's very visually obvious, is that if I'm a sales manager, we're talking about metrics for the given sales manager. And so if I'm a different manager, I can easily see that I want to select myself, or maybe I want to peek at my rival's performance. I can do that as well. But if we change these, then all metrics change, but I'll stick with Melvin for now. From here, we get our total sales. And what I love, and one of the things that I really, that was common across entries that I was really drawn to, was some sort of context for these KPIs. So, a sales of $671,000 doesn't necessarily mean much until we compare to how we did last quarter, for example, as well as how other teams did. So that not only tells me what direction are my sales going in, but it also tells me how do I fit in terms of the organization. And if you're in sales, you know that you want to be towards the top, or you might not be surviving for very long. And so having those metrics and comparisons available quickly really makes it easy for managers to know where they stand. From there, we also get average sale transaction, the amount of time it takes to close, again, with nice comparisons that allow me to say, hey, if my team is taking longer than average, we need to figure out strategies to close faster. Maybe we need better training, et cetera. We also understand our pipeline. So what's coming down? Maybe our sales were down this quarter, but we have a lot in our pipeline that just hasn't closed. All of this is really important context for a sales manager to understand, and I think she nails it. Additionally, really quickly, she also gives us the ability to drill down into specific things. So what did we sell this quarter by sector, product, accounts, as well as individual transactions for folks who really want to dig into this. And then it also tells me what opportunities are coming down the pipeline as well. And so if I'm the sales manager, I could sort by opportunity value and say, hey, we have a really big sale to Marty. The agent Marty here has a $26,000 sale on the line. We're going to put some extra support behind him and close this sale as quickly as possible. But beyond the overall metrics of the team, we then dive into agent performance. And so it's really easy. Again, we don't see too many fancy visuals. And for a lot of people, this is exactly what we want. We have just a table here with nice conditional formatting, but it indicates which agents are performing well on which metrics. And what I love is that it's really easy to see that Darcel is almost carrying this team on his back. We see that his sales are almost equal to, I think they're more than the rest of the agents combined. But we can also see his conversion rate is very high, et cetera. And that, again, allows me to really recognize Darcel as a standout and maybe see that, hey, Naisha needs to talk to Darcel to, improve some of her strategies, et cetera. And finally, we get a nice product view. And you'll note that when I click on individual agents, we can see where they're performing strong on a product basis. So this interactivity adds a ton here, but we get this comparative aspect that allows me to understand every single cog, and maybe I need to sell more of a specific product. That's all right here. But moving on, we get a little bit more information. So where does my team rank relative to other teams on these key metrics? And so because Melvin has a very strong team, he's either first or second in all of these metrics. he's likely doing very well in the eyes of his organization. If I was Dustin Brinkman, I might be a little bit more worried about things. But yeah, and I think this is all really important here. You'll also notice, for example, he has the lowest discounted percent, but all of these factors are things that sales managers need to keep in mind. And the final tab of this dash is performance by quarter. So we have, how am I doing overall? How am I doing versus my peers? And finally, how am I doing across time? And I think all three of those pieces of the puzzle come together to give a manager a really good, sense for what's going on with their team in the context that they need to have. The only minor quibble here, and I actually am not positive the data has this, but if I would like to see 1 quarter prior, just because there are seasonality across quarter. So, we see a decline from Q3 to Q4, but what might be helpful is having Q4 from the last year to understand, is that decline, year over year, or is it just a normal seasonality? But I meant to clarify that. But regardless, I think this is the exact type of dash we want to see. And we also get opportunities, sales by agents. And again, we can see the remaining opportunities as well as their conversion rates by quarter, which is really slick. And again, it gives us the information as we ask for it. It's not overloading us. And I think overall, all of these elements combine to make Kerryn's a very strong, clean entry in this challenge.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I love Kerryn's as well. I can clarify on the data as well. That it is just for those 4 quarters, and actually Q1 is a little bit incomplete. I think it's only the month of March, which is why you have it a lot lower than the rest of the months. But I think it's still a super valid observation. And yeah, I love just looking at this view. The engaging kind of rectangle sticks out. I think Kerryn, more so than anyone else, I think in the finalists that are about to review, had that focus, and you even called it out in that first page where you can dive into the engaging opportunities and the potential revenue there. Driving that focus there, especially since she calls out in her write-up that like total revenue is her main KPI that she wants to focus on. So having looking at the revenue still in the pipeline, I think was really clever. And I just agree with everything you said. I think this works really great. I wish in those KPI cards you had, you do have the previous metric, but some sort of indicator with maybe of use of colors, like just at a glance, was it better or worse versus having to me actually compare the 768 versus the 671. Granted, that takes 2 seconds, but it could take half a second, but I think that's something that you can just share as feedback and be very easily added to the dashboard. Yeah, really clever use of tables too. Like for those sales and conversion by product, you'd think it's a bar chart, but it's really just a table with some data bars in there. And you can use the different columns to add other metrics. I just think it's smart. Maybe people are doing that more often and I just haven't noticed, but I really like it.
Yeah. And really quick, one other thing I wanted to call out is I like that she put instructions here. Like if you've ever worked in an environment where you built a dashboard, you often get a lot of, Slack messages or emails on how to use it. And while it maybe adds just a little bit of visual clutter, overall, I think, if you're talking about people who don't work with these tools often, just saving yourself some time explaining how this works by just putting a few, notes and like she did in this purple text here, really just help provide those instructions up front in a very subtle way as well.
All right. So Gerard obviously is not a new name to the Maven challenges, so it's not really a surprise to see his dashboard and the finalists here. I think that one of the things that makes Gerard's dashboards stand out time over time is really how well thought out and planned they are. So kind of looking at his about section, we can see exactly what I mean. So he talks about his thought process and exactly what he does in order to make his dashboards as strong as they are. Thinking about, a pencil sketch of what he wanted to build and how he wanted to lay things out, I think is such a clever thing to do before even touching the data, touching the dashboard. So awesome kind of thought process there that other people can take and use. The other thing that he really talks about down a little bit further down is the structure of his dashboard. So I think generally he just clearly puts a lot of time and effort into what would be the most important and the best way to display information. And then he kind of goes and he capitalizes on that planning in a way that really makes his dashboards kind of one of a kind. Kind of going into the dashboard here. One of the things that I really think about a lot when we're looking at dashboards is how much training an end user is going to need before they're able to really use that dashboard for what it's intended to be used. When my thinking a lot of the time is that if the end user needs to invest so much time and energy and effort into learning how to use a dashboard, that dashboard is likely going to end up in some kind of graveyard somewhere and never to be used. And that kind of makes the analyst or the person who designed the dashboard not look great, maybe. So really thinking about how easy is this dashboard going to be is great to kind of consider. So in this case, I think Gerard did a really awesome job with that. So he starts at the very top with this dynamic greeting to the person, based on these values that are selected. So right now, Dustin is selected, but I could change that to Kara. And then we're going to see that the name has changed. I could change the quarter, and then it would tell me what quarter we're in. So it really is just a great way to kind of introduce the person to the dashboard. I think the other thing that he does really well here is it's pretty small on my screen, but these are all definitions of exactly what these metrics mean. So again, I'm thinking from the standpoint of people who don't have the same analysis skills, potentially thinking about like defining exactly what each of these metrics mean is really valuable for that person who's looking at it. So I think with the intuitive descriptions, the notes kind of talking about what each of these sections mean, what they're referring to, the really smart color coding, and a very simple layout. I think that this is a dashboard that the end user could probably look at and figure out exactly how to use with little to no input from the designer. So they're not getting those Slack messages asking questions about how to use it and what to do and how did this thing break. So I think it's really strong in that regard. I think looking at the dashboard itself, one of the things that I love is how easy it is to get an overview of how the team is doing compared to other teams in the region, but also compared to all regions as a whole. I like the fact that Gerard kind of did use those color and arrow indications to talk about, it's easy to see at a glance what the current performance is compared to previous performance and compared to, performance in other regions. So I think that was a great addition on his part. Something else that I really like is just this really simple use of bar charts. It's just so easy to see. And you'll see that the person's name kind of stays the same across the entire bottom part so that we're not having to look for a person's name and then look for them in the next bar chart and look for them in the next one. So it's really easy to kind of see exactly where that person stands out. One thing too that Gerard kind of talked about that he did is this use of a yellow bar. So I thought this was interesting. The blue bars mean best performer in that particular sale or that particular manager's sales agents. The red bar means the worst performer, but the yellow bar means that they are the worst performer, but they're still better than the all regions average. So I thought it was really interesting to just kind of call that out and make it apparent that even though that person's not doing the best, they are still doing above average. So I really just liked that little addition here. And then of course we also have, quarter over quarter. So we still have the same kind of setup where we're looking at all regions, team region, and then team overview. I like that it's really the same across pages so that there's nothing new that we need to learn. There's no new interpretation that we need to have. And then the last tab over here is the product analysis. And again, the page layout is different. So it might take a little bit more brain power, but Gerard thoughtfully kind of provided this little explanation of exactly how to use the dashboard and what each of these, what you can change and what that shows. So I think overall, Gerard's dashboard is a really fantastic entry. It's one that I could actually see being adopted and used in a real work setting, which I think kind of speaks to his skills here. And I would definitely recommend people take a look at it. The other thing I wanted to do really is commend Gerard on taking the time to kind of explain the more technical aspects of his project. So if you scroll down in his about section, you'll kind of see, you'll see some of his code, but then you'll also see just some of these technical things, like talking about how he was able to sort people by, keeping the name the same across all charts. He explained exactly how he did that. So somebody else could come in and do something similar. He also did the same thing when we were looking at, I think it was still up here, but when we were looking at the worst performer, that yellow application. He also talked about how he did that. So just a really great kind of teaching opportunity as well. So if anybody wanted to go and take a look at this about section, they could also just learn a lot from what he did. Overall, amazing entry, and this was a great one, Gerard.
I would say just another classic Gerard. I'm starting to recognize some of the things that he does over and over and over again in all of his entries. And I think I actually talked about this in one of the times when I was presenting one of his earlier dashboards, and like those small items that don't really visually add a lot to his otherwise almost flawless design. But if you were to remove them, like those little explanations or tutorials that he builds in so seamlessly into his dashboards, they would be missed, right? They would increase the complexity of the whole thing. People would need a lot more brain power to process all that information, but he does it so strategically, and he does it constantly, right? They're always there, here again. Like it's just doesn't require any effort at all to understand this dashboard.
Yeah, I was coming back to the same thing over and over again, even like trying to figure out how exactly to explain this, you know, the name stays the same, even if they're not the top all the way across the board. And I was kind of thinking about it like, I didn't notice it originally, but had it not been there and had I had to search for that person's name in each individual bar chart, it would have been a problem. So just thinking about kind of like he preempted a lot of what somebody might come back and say, like, hey, this is complex, this is visually too busy for me. And he kind of like preempted that and was able to account for things that like I would not have considered until I saw that they were missing.
Exactly. And if you keep thinking about the simplicity of it, that's actually really two visuals. He has cards, Power BI cards, and bar charts. So there isn't anything else, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe on the subsequent pages, I think there is a matrix visual, but that's it. Like it's three of the most basic visual that you can find, I think, in almost any BI tool. But he's able to manipulate them so strongly that they like seem just out of this world.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Vince's entry. Vince's entry is a true testament of what happens when you don't skip any of the steps in the workflow that we preach over and over and over again. So if you check the write-up of the project, we've seen something very similar with Chris's presentation. Vince defines three questions that are basically going to drive all of his decisions, designer and otherwise. So how are we performing compared to the rest of the organization is one of the questions that the dashboard is designed to answer. How are my individual team members performing, and how is my product portfolio performing? So from a standpoint of a sales manager, this makes a lot of sense, right? This is the product for a sales manager, and this is how it's going to be built. From there, we have some light data prep and QA, and then there is the exploratory data analysis. Now, this bit is important because here is where Vince explains what drove his decision to visualize the metrics that he did. Unlike a lot of the other entries, he doesn't actually visualize all the possible KPIs that exist in the data or could be derived from the data. But you can see that there's a lot of prep work here. He checks the seasonality, he checks for outliers. He actually does a regression analysis to understand what could be the best predictor of revenue. And so based on all of that, I'm not going to dig into the technical details. I invite everybody to read through this. It's not too long, but it is really high quality. So based on all of these analyses, which very correctly stay behind the scenes, so we won't be seeing any of this stuff in the report. This is behind the scenes, and this is what drives his decision to visualize 3 or 4 main KPIs for the dashboard. After that, he actually digs into the dashboard itself, but I have the thing open here, and I think you will find that it's actually quite similar to the dashboard that Chris showed earlier on. Something that struck me actually as Chris was showing this thing to us. We have the filters at the top, something that a lot of people did, and I think it fits excellently into this sort of top-down layout. And the first page, so I'm at the home page here, is like spot on what the manager would want to see. We have the usual KPIs he chose after all of that analysis that we just showed. So he went for the revenue, he went for the number of deals won, and average sales cycle. So these are the metrics that he focuses on. We have the correct context. Now, recently Power BI has been updating their visuals, and you can now put, I think, at least 10 data points into a card, which makes it a little bit cluttered. What I like here is that he keeps that sort of sweet spot where you have the context that you need, but he's still not going overboard. Like, we understand the big data, we understand how it was previous quarter, and we understand the change, which is also correctly color coded with these percentage values over here to the right. From there, one of my personal favorite pieces here is the sort of use of shading instead of pure filtering. So if I change, for example, any of these guys here, I can see that the total for the organization is unchanged. That's the big gray long bar, but the green ones actually do update based on my selection. So a lot of this stuff is dynamic. I love the line chart. Line chart is essentially showing us progress over time against the rest of the organization. And I love that it's not too cluttered, or actually it's not cluttered at all. We see these gray sort of shaded lines which represent different teams. We don't really care which teams they are. We just want to understand our team's position relative to theirs. So if I find, for example, somebody else, I can see that this person's team is performing better, and I have all the data at a glance about them. Moving forward, there is the team detail page. Now, one sort of, I don't know if this was by design, but I actually have to select the manager here. The title is dynamic, which means I know which page I am on. However, I cannot directly change the manager right here from this page. Intentionally or not, I'll leave it to Vince. It could be a little bit more handy to be able to update stuff here as well, but this works just as well. So the idea here is that we have the breakdown of the team. We have all the team members here, the sales agents, and then we have their performance across revenue metrics, total deals, average sales cycle, and we have these cool little sort of dotted lines, columns at the back that are sort of like comparison points against the rest of the organization. So we can see that this person, for example, is in the top 10% of the entire company based on her effect on the revenue that she's having. And we see these sort of same metrics and same comparison capabilities across the board. What's more, there's actually some very smartly driven recommendations at the bottom, which sort of give us some sort of an idea who is struggling with what can be improved, all of which is summarized here in this recommended action sort of table where we have this really cool like ideas of how we can award some of the best performers, somebody who should be maybe taking additional training or support, or in the case of very bad performance, we need to dig deeper into the reasons why that is happening. So honestly, in my opinion, if we are thinking about the challenge prompt and the ask was that we build a dynamic dashboard that allows managers to sort of investigate and keep tabs on their team's performance, I would probably argue that this should live as a landing page. So this should be the main piece where a manager who is looking into their team should probably land when they open the report. And finally, we have we have the products details. Here I can select team members, but again, the manager is locked on that first page. So if I wanted to change this, I want to come back, and then I have Melvin's team right here, and I can sort of select from all of those guys. I'm probably, compared to the rest, this is a little bit weaker. That's not to say that it's a bad page. I love the idea of this area chart here, but it is, when you have a simple sort of color schemes like this, it gets a little bit difficult to read through this stuff. And also, anybody who knows me knows that I hate map visuals, so I'm not gonna even comment on that. But overall, I really love the sort of very intentional use of color here. It's a simple color scheme. It backfires a little bit when we use it in a more complex visual like this, especially if I, for example, want to filter stuff, then these things tend to break really fast. For example, you get this sort of very, very, very distorted visual here. But overall, it's a really, really slick, really easy to understand report, very fast. So awesome work, Vince.
Bronislav, I think I agree with you that second page I would consider putting as, that the landing page here. I think one thing that stands out to me that I didn't see in every entry is that like recommended action. I think that's such a great idea, especially if we're talking to the sales manager who, not only are we saying like, this is how your team is doing, but also here are some things that you might want to consider in response to that team's performance. So I really think that that's a great idea to have this included here. So I love this page. I definitely think it could be a landing page and would be a great it would be a great place for people to start.
Yeah, and I also wanted to chime in on that bottom piece there. I mean, like most sales orgs have like certain thresholds for bonuses as well as, getting cut or getting training. So I think he's thinking ahead. Obviously, we don't have that information, but I think just the fact that Vince is thinking about that and really highlighting that for these managers is a really, really creative feature that I don't think we saw very frequently. I will defend the geo feature a little bit. I think the data wasn't granular enough for this visual to be super effective in the context of this data set. But if I'm thinking from the perspective of a sales manager, I could drill down into my sales region, and if I have agents assigned to particular territories, it would allow me to see what the coverage is and maybe where opportunities for lead generation are. So again, I think it's subjective, and maybe that may or may not be, but I do like the thought there, and I think understanding where your sales presence is also allows you to understand where opportunities might be, particularly if you're Dustin and really need to get your numbers up, sweating a little bit. So, anyways, yeah, but I like this dash a lot.
One call out in the interest of being thorough. I think that there is a small bug here. So under certain conditions, and let me try to replicate those. I think I was looking at Celia's team, and then if I come here, there is actually, oh no, it works now, because originally when I was looking at this tended to be 0 here. So it said in this team 0 agents have generated more than 90%, but the charts were telling a different story. But it seems to be working right now. So maybe it's some sort of fringe case that I was able to replicate today, or it was just an IT gremlin that allowed for me embarrassing myself right now. But I do agree that it is very, very thoughtful sort of detail, especially with the training and support bits that are often the case in sales organizations.
Yeah, I will also say that I had a similar thing happen where I was like, oh, how can I change the manager after I move on to the next page? But you actually can with that top left little filter icon if you go to the second or the last page.
Oh, right. There is an expandable, right?
Change the manager.
So I can do this here.
Yeah.
But to be fair, like this is something that your you would get emails about or
Yeah.
Slack messages about, like, hey, like what's broken,
Yeah.
and
And the curious thing about the map, if I go back to that, is I agree with both of your points, I guess. The only thing I'll say, it's interesting. The red means most revenue here, where red means like bad performance in every other single chart that we see in this entire dashboard. Again, something that you can just change. But yeah, it's just something I noticed. I love this, by the way. I think that the thought behind what went into this is what impressed me the most.
Okay, today I'm going to be going over John's submission. And I would say immediately when I saw John's submission, it really stood out to me. And I'm just going to scroll down here a bit so you can see the full dashboard. So the reason why this stood out to me so much is, I'm going to say my first reason is just the overall feel. I know that's kind of like a vague adjective, but it's true. Like when I look at this, the first thing I feel is calm. And I would say as a sales manager, that is a feeling you want to get when you look at a dashboard, because you don't want to be overwhelmed and then you want to throw it away. But if you look at the colors, everything's very calming. The structure is very, very calming. It's very organized. A lot of the other dashboards, they had written details of what certain things meant, which I get, like that absolutely makes sense. But in this case, because it doesn't have that, it's a lot less cluttered. And so it gives you this sense of calm. So that was the first thing that stood out to me. The second thing that stood out to me is just the flow. This is incredibly well organized. And one thing I'll note here is that everything is just on one page, like before a lot of the other entries had multiple pages, but John's able to capture so much information in just one page. So in his About This Project section, he talks about how he used pencil and paper to sketch it out, just like Lauren, you mentioned with Gerard. That's something I do before every dashboard, before every visualization. I love using pencil and paper. And then he also talks about how then he wireframed it using another tool. So there was just a lot of planning to get to this point. And you see that the flow is really nice because you start with the performance overview for the team. You then dive into how the sales agents compared with each other and then a specific agent. So it's just incredibly well organized. And you can see all the most important metrics come to the top. So you see this revenue, deals won, and then revenue and deals won down here is broken down. And then revenue deals won here is broken down over quarter for each agent. So it's so well organized. Everything's in these consistent colors. My main piece of feedback with this dashboard would be this tree over here. This structure, when I saw it, I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool. That was my first thought. And then when you dig into it some more, then you start realizing certain parts that might be confusing. So if I just zoom in here a bit, you see this is the revenue this quarter. This index here, this is an interesting piece because I like seeing this index. I've talked with some others where they're like, oh, this index is confusing, but this is something when I worked with the sales team, we used all the time, just how do you compare with other teams? So I think with some training, the sales managers could understand what that means. And then there's also this percent change versus previous quarter, which is an interesting stat. But then I think the confusing part comes with these colors, because it took me a while to figure out what the colors corresponded to. And I realized it corresponds to this percent change, but this whole box also includes the index. So I think the whole box color shouldn't be changed. It really should be like this one here is green, this one here, if it's under indexing, it's red. So that's one small tweak. And then also, instead of having this tree here, like normally I would say, like if I see two parts under a box, it feeds into one. But in this case, this is deal revenue and it's split into deals won and then average deal value, which don't really add up to that top bit. So I would actually split this because these two deal with money. So those could be one section. And then these here all deal with deals won and closed, and that could be its own section. So those are my two pieces of feedback. But I got to say, I like the look of this dashboard. I would say like more than any other one, it's not too professional, but it's calm and it makes you want to explore more because it's so simple. In the best way possible. It's simple and clear. So yeah, great job, John.
I was looking at this quite a bit beforehand, and I agree. I do love the sort of node leaf breakdown at the left-hand side, and I really wanted it to be like perfect. But to your point, Alice, as you start digging into it, it can be confusing simply because different type of metrics would live at the same level, and then they don't really compare, but they also don't add to anything above or below. So as an idea, it really is amazing. But but probably would need a little bit probably would need a little polishing, just to be perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that in my mind this makes sense, and again, I think to Alice's point, you could train people and it would become a useful visual with some practice. But to me, like we start with the biggest bucket up top and we split, so it would be like total opportunities, and then we would talk about like deals won versus lost and have the average metrics for those, and then kind of think about like starting with the biggest bucket and total opportunities, total potential revenue, and then actually what revenue is captured and how does that contribute to like the closed deals, et cetera. And then maybe you have something about still in flight or whatever, like still opportunities open. But I think the biggest confusion for me was looking at deals won, which is 137, and then seeing a larger number for deals closed. And I understand that some deals are closed because they're not won, but I feel like you want to invert that so that we start with deals closed and then see what was won versus lost, and then have like average revenue metrics or in the metrics that we have there. But again, I really love the thought process there, and I think that's something that with a little bit of iteration, it would become like a super novel and outstanding way to visualize the sales funnel in a very meaningful way. I think it was like one or two tweaks or pieces of feedback away from getting there for sure.
So before I jump into Anna's dashboard, which I love, by the way, and I think I'd never thought, to your point, Alice, about the dashboard making me feel calm, but I agree that John's does that, and I actually think Anna's does that too. Now that I look at it from that perspective, and it's probably something that we should all aspire to do. I can't really think of a scenario where you wouldn't want it to be calm, but then maybe just try to just follow their lead. But yeah, before I jump in, I just want to quickly talk about this project section. It's a little bit less fleshed out, a lot less fleshed out, actually, I'd say, than some of the others we've seen, like Kerryn's, like Gerard's, like Vince's. And I do wish we had some of that, background into what went in here that goes beyond what we can see. But there's still some good stuff in here. We start with just calling out the business objective. These first two parts really just restate the challenge prompt. Fair enough. But from there, she really talks about, she steps into the end user's shoes and she says, what could they be thinking about or looking for? And she states this as, as a sales manager, I want to compare quarter results for closed deals on various levels so that I can assess overall team performance to inform future strategy. And then she uses that to define the metrics that are relevant to that, scenario that she, outlined based on the challenge prompt. So she's going to look at won deals, 1% revenue, and then the average days to close. And then the rest of this really just talks about how she incorporated that into the dashboard. Best way to do that is just to really take a look at the dashboard itself. I wish it was embedded, but it's still linked here. You can just click on it. It'll open on Tableau Public. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think this reminds me a lot of Gerard's, actually. And I know Gerard mentioned the top-down structure. We see the same exact top-down structure here. You have, the manager, their region, and the selected quarter. You can change that here if you want to. Change it. Takes a little bit to load, but I think that's fine. Change it to the most recent quarter, which is Q4. And then just like Gerard, we have this top-down structure where first we look at the company KPIs for all the 4 metrics. Then we look at the region for the selected managers' KPIs, and then we look at their team's KPIs. And I think one thing that I love about this one is just like at a glance, the color coding lets you know company's down, all metrics for quarter over quarter. But the West region and our team, or Celia's team, is up at least in terms of won deals and in win percentage, like without even having to look at any numbers. And if we do start to look at the numbers, you can see that we're actually down quite significantly in revenue, which is down 12.3% quarter over quarter, which is a lot of a steeper drop off than the 6% for the company, or just the 1.9% for the rest of the region, which is interesting. And then from there, you get a little bit more detail, pretty much just like Gerard did. There are some slight differences. Lauren, Bronislav, to your points here, we do have to look for Vicky. I guess she's top here and everyone, but never mind. They're actually all sorted in the same way. I thought I had to kind of move across. They're all sorted again by won deals. We're just getting the repeated names. I don't think there's any harm in that either. I just kind of thought it was sorted for each one, but I love calling out the best performer. I know Gerard called out the worst performer as well. But what I like the most about this one compared to Gerard's, and I make the comparisons just because I think they're looking at pretty much the same data here, is that here you get the quarter over quarter within the same view. I know for Gerard's you had to move on to the next page, but the lines here, like you get the current performance compared across the teams, and you can see how their each performance compares to the previous quarter. And if we just take a look at Marquita's here, like we can see that she's the main reason pretty much that we had this big of a fall off in this quarter, because she's nowhere near her revenue from the previous quarter. So that immediately tells me that that's something that I can focus on. And then we have the same kind of structure for the products. I know Gerard had a separate page for that, and I think that's fair enough. But I think just looking at that in that same context, again, in a single page, which Alice, I know you mentioned that you like that about John's. I think it works really well here for Anna's as well, just keeping everything in a single page, very easy to follow. I think it's great. It's interesting to me that it looks like Anna was actually inspired by Ellen here and their consumer duty scorecard. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this inspire a lot of people too. I just think it's a great structure for a dashboard. Just an overall great work for this challenge. But yeah, that's all the finalists. I don't know. What do we think? I'll go back here. Who do we think put together the best interactive dashboard for sales managers to track their team's quarterly performance?
This is tough. It's really tough.
Yeah, it's kind of the trend in the past few challenges, right? It's just getting harder and harder.
I have to say some. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring for Vince. I really think that, based on Bronislav's breakdown and also just what he presented and the thoughtfulness of how he laid everything out, I thought that was a really top-notch dashboard.
I was gonna say, like, there are these two sort of themes. Vince and Kerryn's are very, very similar on one end. On the other end, there is Gerard and Anna, which are also quite similar. I actually like Kerryn's a little bit more than Vince's, and that's saying something because I really like his dashboard. And I think probably they have awesome color themes. They're really clean and polished. His is probably a little bit more thought through in terms of what he's going to show, but I really like, none of the other finalists had this, and I actually like it. Some of the other entries that we were considering, I love the fact that you can actually drill down to the deal level. I have a feeling that a sales manager would want to have access to this stuff, even if they don't use it every day, maybe. But I have a feeling that they will want to understand, maybe there is an important deal and I can see the details of this deal. We saw that. I think Stefano had it. Also, I liked it. I was talking about it before. I really like that piece, and that's the reason that I'm going to lean towards Kerryn for some sort of let's call it point. But yeah, it's tough. I don't know. Well, I could easily choose 3 more. So
Yeah, I'll say I really like Vince's because I just thought the recommendations, the good performance and poor performers was really great. But if we're comparing Kerryn's and Vince's, I do feel like Vince could have cut his down a little bit just because he had so much information. Yeah, I like to go for simplicity. So if it was like more like focus on that second page versus I really like Kerryn's because I just feel like she had the information you needed and it was like a lot of details, but in a small, like clear space. So if we're comparing Vince and Kerryn, I would go with Kerryn.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm Kerryn's champion, and I easily could go for either one. But I think what sticks out to me about Kerryn's is like there aren't really any flaws in execution. The execution is spotless, and to me, yeah, that to Brano's point, that drill down capability just gives that last piece of information to sales managers that we don't get anywhere else. That to me is like, could be optional based on the prompt, but I think is critical based on like, the first thing that they're going to do if they see someone that's performing poorly is ask about someone's pipeline and ask like, because the sales manager might say, I was low this quarter, but I'm working on like several big deals. And just being able to get that information and prepare for those conversations, I think to me, really, really demonstrates forward thinking. What I would love is if Kerryn had Vince's, performance report and recommendations. But overall, I think, I think I still lean towards Kerryn's. But man, what a field of competitors we had this time.
All right, so it looks like we kind of have our minds made up. I agree with most of your thoughts, really. I think I love Vince's work that kind of led up to the dashboard. I think Kerryn's is a little bit more useful for sales managers, just in its simplicity and its the focus on the like what's next and the potential to close and like looking ahead in the pipeline. I think is also very valuable. I think if everyone's ready, we can give it a vote. Looks like really we just kind of talk about Kerryn's and Vince's. So we'll just do one for Kerryn, two for Vince, and see where that takes us. All right. 1, 2, 3. Wow. All right, let's do a round of applause for Kerryn, our first unanimous winner, maybe ever. I'm not sure, but impressive.
You guys can see. I was there.
All right.
We've had unanimous winners, but not recently, and definitely not how I thought this was going to end.
Oh, congratulations, Kerryn. As a prize, you'll take home a free annual membership to Maven Analytics and a custom Maven Challenge winner t-shirt. So congratulations. Yeah, that's it for this challenge. Thanks once again to everyone that continues to participate. I hope we have even tougher discussions in future challenges. It's just been great these last few. I mean, it's always been great, but we're just getting just higher and higher quality submissions every time. And maybe it's just a testament of how much you improve by just participating in these kinds of things. So we hope to see all of you again in the next one. Goodbye.